200 meters. That's the distance that separated them that morning in the Bay of Naples. Two of the most recognizable private vessels on Earth. One was a floating Apple store, 78 meters of aluminum and glass, commissioned by Steve Jobs for $200 million, designed to be invisible, efficient, perfect. The other was a golden palace, 105 meters of excess, worth over $100 million, impossible to ignore. Both anchored in calm water, both crewed by professionals, both insured for fortunes. And by nightfall, one would be embedded in the side of the other, filmed in real time and posted online for 5 million people to watch. This is the dark story of Steve Jobs' superyacht collision, the most embarrassing billionaire accident ever. We're going to cover everything: the yachts themselves, their designs and philosophies, the squall that compressed two worldviews into the same space, the 47 seconds of contact that were captured on camera, and what happened when a private maritime incident became viral content. The question is simple: was this an accident of weather and geometry, or a collision that revealed something deeper about the future of wealth at sea? Summer 2024. The Mediterranean is crowded, not with tourists, with titans. The superyacht calendar has become a circuit, a procession of floating territories moving from Monaco to Capri to Mykonos, each vessel carrying its own staff, its own jurisdiction, its own idea of what power should look like when it floats. The Bay of Naples that week held 17 yachts over 50 meters. That's not unusual anymore. What was unusual was the composition. Among them were two vessels that represented opposite ends of the same spectrum. One designed to disappear, the other designed to announce. The first was Venus, 78 meters, built by Fedship in the Netherlands, delivered in 2012, 1 year after the death of the man who commissioned her. Steve Jobs never set foot aboard. He died 3 days after her hull was launched. The yacht was completed for his widow, Lorene Powell Jobs, who has kept it in quiet circulation ever since. Venus does not look like a yacht. That was the point. It looks like a product. Aluminum skin, no curves, no ornamentation. The hull is flat white, industrial, almost sterile. The superstructure rises in sharp angles, 40-millimeter glass panels floor to ceiling, each pane custom-made to eliminate mullions. From a distance, it looks like a floating data center. From up close, it looks like something that shouldn't float at all. Inside, the design was equally ruthless. Philippe Starck was given one brief: make it feel like an Apple store, but on water. The result was a vessel with almost no decoration. Teak decks, yes, but pale, almost blonde. White leather seating, steel fixtures, and on the bridge, a row of 7 27-inch iMacs, backlit, running custom navigation software that Jobs had personally requested before his illness made further involvement impossible. There are 6 staterooms. The owner's suite spans the full beam of the main deck, but it is not opulent. It is sparse. A low bed, minimal cabinetry, floor-to-ceiling glass on 3 sides. The design philosophy was clarity, transparency, the idea that luxury is not about accumulation, but about reduction, about removing everything until only the essential remains. The crew quarters are equally restrained. 16 permanent staff, a Norwegian captain, a French chef. The rest, multinational, rotated carefully, paid well, and bound by non-disclosure agreements that extend beyond employment. Very little is known about life aboard Venus because very little is said. The yacht operates like the company that inspired it, silently, efficiently, and with an aesthetic that suggests the people aboard have nothing to prove. But aesthetics are never neutral. Minimalism is a choice, and that choice communicates just as loudly as excess. 200 meters away, anchored off the same volcanic coastline, was Lady Mora. 105 meters. Built in 1990 by Bloom and Voss in Germany, she was, at the time of her launch, the ninth largest private yacht in the world. She was commissioned by Nasser al-Rashid, a Saudi Arabian businessman and advisor to the royal family, a man who had helped negotiate arms deals and infrastructure projects across the Middle East. The yacht cost over $200 million, and every surface of her communicated that fact. Lady Mora is not minimalist. She is not restrained. She is, in the language of naval architecture, a djinn palace. The hull is deep blue, almost royal. The superstructure is white, multi-tiered, with balconies and sun decks stacked like a wedding cake. And across the side of the hull, in gold-plated letters, each a meter tall, is the name, Lady Mora. Gold plating on the exterior of a yacht is rare. It is not structural. It is not functional. It exists to be seen. And it requires constant maintenance. Salt air corrodes gold just as it corrodes steel, only slower and more expensively. Inside, the yacht was a catalog of 1990s ambition. 30 rooms, a cinema, a swimming pool that converted into a dance floor with a rising platform, and at the stern, a feature that was revolutionary at the time, a beach club, a hydraulic platform that lowered to just above the waterline, creating a private sand-covered deck where guests could lounge as if on shore while still floating. The owner's suite occupied the entire upper deck, king-sized bed, jacuzzi tub, walls lined with silk, not fabric, but actual woven silk panels imported from Lyon. The bathroom fixtures were gold-plated. The dining table seated 24. The galley could produce a 6-course meal for 40 guests with 2 hours' notice. There were 18 permanent crew, and during charter seasons, that number doubled. In 2017, Lady Mora was sold. The new owner was Ricardo Salinas Pliego, a Mexican billionaire who had built his fortune in media, telecommunications, and retail. He owned Grupo Salinas, a conglomerate with interests across Latin America, and his net worth at the time of purchase was estimated at $13 billion. He was known for two things: aggressive business tactics and an equally aggressive presence on social media. Salinas did not buy Lady Mora to disappear. He bought her because she was visible, because her size and her gold lettering announced arrival, and because in the ecosystem of the ultra-wealthy, visibility is not a liability, it is a tool. So that morning, in late July, the two yachts sat at anchor, Venus, pale and angular, her crew invisible. Lady Mora, massive and tiered, her crew moving across the decks in white uniforms, her beach club deployed, her tenders shuttling guests to and from shore. The Bay of Naples is one of the oldest anchorages in the Mediterranean. The Romans anchored here. So did the Byzantines, the Normans, the Spanish, the French. It has been a stage for empires, a port for navies, a refuge for merchants, and for the last 30 years, a summer parking lot for the global elite. But it is not infinite. The bay is large, yes, but the desirable anchoring zones are constrained by depth, by current, by proximity to shore, and by the unspoken hierarchy of arrival. The first yacht to anchor has priority. The second must anchor outside the swing radius of the first, the third outside both, and so on. Swing radius is not metaphorical. It is geometric. When a yacht is anchored, it does not remain stationary. The anchor holds the bow, but the stern swings with the wind and current, tracing a circle around the anchor point. That circle is called the swing radius, and it is calculated using the length of the vessel plus the length of the anchor chain deployed. For Venus, 78 meters long, with 6 shackles of chain paid out, that's roughly 230 meters. For Lady Mora, 105 meters long with 7 shackles deployed, closer to 290 meters. And here is where the margins collapse. If two yachts anchor 300 meters apart, Their swing circles do not overlap. If they anchor 250 meters apart, the circles touch. If they anchor 200 meters apart, the circles intersect. And if the wind shifts, or the current changes, or a squall rolls in without warning, one yacht can drift into the path of the other. That is not negligence. That is geometry. And geometry does not care about wealth. The morning of July 22nd was calm. Wind at 5 knots. Flat water. No weather warnings. The forecast called for sun, light breeze, temperatures in the low 30s. Conditions, in other words, that would hold for days. But the Mediterranean does not follow forecasts. It follows pressure. And that afternoon, a low-pressure cell moved south from the Italian mainland, colliding with warm air rising off the bay. The result was a localized squall, a sudden compression of energy into a narrow band of wind and rain that forms in minutes and vanishes just as quickly. By 4 in the afternoon, the wind speed had jumped to 55 knots. That is not a hurricane. That is not even a storm. But it is enough. Enough to shift a yacht's angle. Enough to strain an anchor chain. Enough to turn a swing radius into a collision course. On the bridge of Lady Mora, the officer on watch noted the wind shift and checked the anchor display. 7 shackles deployed, approximately 190 meters of chain. For the depth they were anchored in, 32 meters, that was within acceptable range. The standard rule is 5 to 7 times the depth. They were at 6, technically adequate, practically strained. On Venus, there was no visible activity. The bridge glass reflected only the sky. No crew appeared on deck. No engines started. The yacht simply began to swing. From the deck of Lady Mora, crew members watched as Venus's bow turned, slowly, incrementally, away from the wind. She was not dragging anchor. She was pivoting. But the arc of that pivot brought her closer, closer to Lady Mora's stern, closer to the swim platform, closer to the point where aluminum would meet steel. Ricardo Salinas Pliego was standing on the aft deck of his yacht. He was not alone, but he was the one with the phone. He raised it, framed the shot, and began recording. What he captured was not violence. It was inevitability. The bow of Venus, sharp as a blade, angular and unforgiving, moved across the water with the slow certainty of a ship already committed to its course. There was no collision alarm, no shouting, just the hum of wind and the rising sound of displacement, the way water moves when a hull pushes through it without propulsion. And then, contact. The noise is what viewers remember, not the impact itself, but the sound it made. A low, grinding crunch, metal on metal, aluminum scraping across steel. It lasted 4 seconds, long enough to leave a mark, not long enough to penetrate. Salinas kept filming. He panned to Venus's bridge. Still empty, no crew visible, no response. He shouted in Spanish, then in English, "Hey, wake up! You hit me!" No answer. The 2 yachts pulled apart, not violently but slowly, as the wind continued to shift and Venus's stern swung away. The damage was visible immediately. A deep scratch, 3 meters long across Lady Mora's starboard hull, just above the waterline. Not structural, not catastrophic, but unmistakably there. Salinas stopped recording. He lowered the phone. And then he did something that would define the incident more than the collision itself. He posted the video. The squall had not been forecasted. I will demand supposed to better focusing and stid that it for the first time. The squall had not been forecast, and the other point was so many to the video. The squall had not been fully help and after the phone is renewly the video. The trapically a number of Lady Mora willed it. Then he faulted and raced it soundwork, the country then believe. The squall had not been forecast, whichever than his privatment. The squall had let the phone placed would fall the traffic, the placed of a great plaint incident to get look like video of a collision. then posted with this in the system. This between will to the mother purse at was being there. The squall had shared the this but there clearly. But the other one will not doing the incident better, folks, with an other of collision. Then the video was just to spent that the artifice believe. The squall had been focused, and the cross the women says, then be older here. The squall had posted be lift. The conductive spirit was not be prevent from the magooding him, but the incident not be clear. The squall had been turned for the west. The collision is the believe and posted for the video, then pullied them to begin. The squall had posted be a lift, and the cross the women says, renewly the video. The squall had posted be lift. The collision is the believe the quick like heavitive to the point, but renewly they be aboard him to the west. The squall had posted be lift. The collision is the believe the quick like heavitive to the point, but renewly the video. But the next time was presented in the world. Across the wind had not been forecasted. That is the first thing investigators would note later when the incident was reviewed by insurers, by maritime authorities, by the endless chain of entities that must be notified when two vessels of this value come into contact. The meteorological services for the region had issued no warnings. The marine VHF channels had broadcast no alerts. The weather applications used by most yacht crews, which pulled data from satellite feeds and coastal monitoring stations, had shown nothing unusual. But squalls do not announce themselves. They form in the gaps between data points. A squall is not a storm system. It is a localized event, a compression of atmospheric energy that can appear in minutes and dissipate just as quickly. In the Mediterranean, particularly in the summer months, they are not uncommon. They form when hot air rising from the land meets cooler air over the water, creating instability. The result is a sudden spike in wind speed, often accompanied by a brief, violent burst of rain. On July 22nd, the squall formed over the Tyrrhenian Sea, just west of the Bay of Naples. It moved east, accelerating as it compressed. By the time it reached the anchorage, the wind speed had jumped from 5 knots to 55 in less than 12 minutes. That is a tenfold increase. And for vessels at anchor, that kind of acceleration leaves no time to react. The standard protocol for an anchored yacht in rising wind is simple: pay out more chain, or start the engines and motor into the wind to relieve strain on the anchor. But that protocol assumes two things. First, that the crew is aware of the wind shift in time to respond. Second, that there is space to maneuver. In the Bay of Naples that afternoon, neither condition was met. The wind hit Lady Mora first. She was anchored closer to the western edge of the bay, directly in the path of the squall. The officer on watch felt the yacht heel slightly, a subtle shift in balance that any experienced mariner recognizes immediately. He checked the anemometer. 52 knots, gusting to 55. He called the captain. Captain Andreas Leventis had been with Lady Mora for 6 years. Greek, 48 years old, with a master's license and certifications in both sail and motor vessels over 500 gross tons. He had worked on superyachts since his early 20s, moving up from deckhand to mate to captain, and he knew the Mediterranean as well as anyone. He also knew that anchor watch was not a passive role. He arrived on the bridge within 2 minutes. The yacht was holding position. The anchor was not dragging, but the strain on the chain was visible on the tension monitor, a digital readout that measures the force being applied to the anchor rod. It was reading 7 tons. That was within the safe range for the chain grade they were using, but it was close to the threshold. Leventis made the decision not to pay out additional chain. They were already at 7 shackles, 190 meters. To go to 8 or 9 would extend their swing radius further, and there were other yachts anchored nearby. Instead, he ordered the engines started, a precautionary measure. If the wind increased further, they could motor into it, taking pressure off the anchor. The engines came online. Twin MTU diesels, each producing over 2,000 horsepower, designed for a yacht of this size and displacement. They idled in neutral, ready, and then Leventis looked west, toward Venus. She was swinging. A yacht at anchor pivots around its anchor point like a hand on a clock. The bow remains relatively fixed. The stern sweeps in an arc. Venus's stern was moving south, which meant her bow was turning north, and north was where Lady Mora sat. Leventis picked up the VHF radio and switched to channel 16, the international hailing and distress frequency. Yacht Venus, this is motor yacht Lady Mora. You are swinging into our position. Please acknowledge. No response. He repeated the call. Still nothing. He switched to channel 72, a common working channel used by yachts in the area. Venus, Lady Mora, you are dragging toward us. Please respond. Silence. Leventis watched through binoculars. Venus was approximately 150 meters away now and closing. He could see her bow clearly, the sharp aluminum angles, the oversized glass panels. But he could not see anyone on the bridge. The windows reflected only sky. He turned to his first officer. Prepare to weigh anchor. Weighing anchor in high wind is not a simple maneuver. The windlass, the motorized drum that hauls the chain back aboard, must pull against the full weight of the chain plus the tension being applied by the wind. For a yacht the size of Lady Mora, that is a significant load. It would take time, and time was compressing. Venus was now 100 meters away. Her swing arc had become a straight line. She was not pivoting anymore. She was drifting. Leventis called the engine room. Full power, stand by. He turned the helm to starboard, trying to angle Lady Mora away from the approaching yacht. But with the anchor still down, the yacht could not turn freely. She pivoted slightly, but not enough. 80 meters. Leventis made another radio call, this time with more urgency. Venus, you are on a collision course. We are anchored and unable to maneuver. Acknowledge immediately. Nothing. 60 meters. And then, from the aft deck, a shout. One of the deckhands had seen it too. Ricardo Salinas, the owner, was already on deck, phone in hand, filming. Leventis could do nothing but watch. Venus's bow was not moving quickly. It was not a ram. It was a slow drift, the kind of motion that appears almost gentle until you calculate the mass behind it. Venus displaces approximately 600 tons fully loaded. That is the weight of 500 cars moving at 2 knots. There is nothing gentle about that. The bow made contact with Lady Mora's starboard side, just aft of the swim platform at the waterline. The sound was immediate. A grinding crunch, metal compressing metal, aluminum against steel. The impact lasted 4 seconds. Then Venus's bow slid along the hull, scraping as it passed, before her stern swung away and the 2 yachts separated. The wind was already dropping. The squall had peaked. Within 5 minutes, the wind speed would fall back to 20 knots. Within 10, it would be calm again, but the damage was done. Leventis went down to the main deck immediately. The scratch was 3 meters long, a deep gouge that had peeled away paint and exposed bare metal beneath. It had not penetrated the hull. There was no flooding, no structural compromise. But it was visible. Unmistakably visible. And on a yacht of this caliber, visibility is everything. He turned and saw Salinas still holding his phone, still recording. The owner was shouting toward Venus, his voice carrying across the water. "Hey, you hit my boat! Look what you did!" There was no response from Venus. Her bridge remained dark. Her crew, if they were watching, did not show themselves. Salinas lowered his phone and looked at Leventis. "Did you call them?" "Multiple times," Leventis said. No answer. Salinas nodded slowly. Then he turned and walked back inside. What happened next would not be handled by captains or crew. It would be handled by insurers, by lawyers, by the bureaucratic machinery that governs incidents between vessels of this value. But before any of that could begin, Salinas did something that bypassed all of it. He posted the video online. The platform was X, formerly Twitter. Salinas had over 1 million followers. He was active on the platform, posting about business, about politics, about his yachts and his jets and his lifestyle. He understood engagement. He understood virality. And he understood that in the ecosystem of the ultra-wealthy, perception is as valuable as capital. The video went live at 6:47 p.m. local time. The caption was simple. So the @Apple yacht Venus damaged my yacht Lady Mora in Naples today. Maybe @Lorene Powell can help me with the repairs. Or just tell people to buy more iPhones. The tone was mocking, playful, but with an edge. It was not a distress call. It was a flex, a public shaming. And it worked. Within an hour, the video had been viewed 50,000 times. By midnight, over 1 million. By the next morning, it had been picked up by news outlets, by yacht blogs, by tech journalists, by anyone who found the spectacle of 2 billionaire-owned vessels colliding in the Mediterranean too good to ignore. The comments were immediate and predictable. Jokes about Apple's declining quality control, jokes about automated driving for yachts, jokes about the 1% having problems the rest of us could never imagine. But beneath the humor was something else, a fascination with the visual evidence, the fact that someone had filmed it, the fact that it had been shared. In the past, an incident like this would have been handled privately. The captains would have exchanged information. The insurers would have been notified. Surveyors would have been dispatched. Repair estimates would have been drawn up. Liability would have been debated behind closed doors, and a settlement would have been reached, quietly, without fanfare. But Salinas had made it public, and in doing so, he had turned a maritime incident into content, into spectacle, into a moment that would define both vessels not by their design or their pedigree, but by the fact that they had touched. The video showed everything: the approach, the contact, the scrape, and, most importantly, the absence. The absence of any visible response from Venus. The empty bridge. The silence. That absence became the narrative. Not the wind, not the squall, not the anchor protocols or the swing radius calculations. The story became, where was the crew? It is a fair question. A yacht of Venus's caliber does not anchor without watch. Bridge watch is a requirement under international maritime regulations. Even at anchor, someone must be monitoring the vessel's position, the weather, the radio. That is not optional. It is law. So where were they? The official statement from Venus's management company came 2 days later. It was brief, carefully worded, and revealed almost nothing. The crew of MY Venus was aware of the weather conditions and took appropriate action to mitigate risk. The incident was minor, and both vessels sustained only cosmetic damage. The matter is being handled by insurers. That was it. No apology, no explanation, no acknowledgement of the radio calls. Just a confirmation that the incident had occurred and that it was being processed. But the absence of detail only fueled speculation. If the crew was aware, why didn't they respond? If they took action, what action did they take? And if the damage was cosmetic, why did it look, in the video, like a direct hit? The answer, as is often the case, was less dramatic than the speculation. Venus had not dragged anchor. Her anchor had held. What happened was a wind shift that changed the yacht's orientation faster than the crew could compensate. By the time the officer on watch realized the swing radius was intersecting with Lady Mora's position, the wind had already committed the yacht to its arc. The decision not to respond to the radio calls was, according to sources familiar with the incident, a judgment call made by the officer on deck. He believed that engaging the engines while the yacht was swinging would create more risk, not less. Starting engines in high wind requires precise throttle control, and in close quarters, with another yacht nearby, the The wash from the propellers can destabilize both vessels. So he did nothing. He let the swing complete, and he accepted the contact as inevitable. That decision may have been technically correct, but it looked like negligence. And in the age of social media, looking like negligence is the same as being negligent. The damage to Venus was minimal. A small dent in the bow plating, barely visible. The damage to Lady Mora was more significant, but still superficial. The repair estimate came in at just under €200,000. That included repainting the affected section, blending the new paint with the old, and reapplying the gold lettering. €200,000 for a scratch on a yacht worth over $100 million. And yet, the cost was not the point. The point was that it had happened at all. That two of the most recognizable yachts on Earth had collided in broad daylight, in calm water, in one of the most well-traveled anchorages in the Mediterranean, and that the entire incident had been filmed. The insurers settled within 6 weeks. Venus's underwriters accepted liability. The claim was paid. Lady Mora was repaired at a facility in Genoa. By September, the scratch was gone. The gold letters gleamed again, but the video remained. It could not be repaired. It could not be settled. It would exist, archived and accessible as long as the platform hosted it. And every time someone searched for Venus or Lady Mora or superyacht collision, they would find it. That is the new reality of wealth at sea. It is not enough to own a vessel. You must also control its image. And when that image is captured by someone else, someone with a platform and a following and a willingness to share, control becomes impossible. The Bay of Naples is crowded. That is not news. It has been crowded for years. But the nature of that crowding has changed. 20 years ago, the largest yachts in the bay were 60 meters. Now they are over 100. 20 years ago, there were perhaps 5 yachts over 50 meters anchored at any given time. Now, there are 20, 30, sometimes more. The anchorages have not expanded. The bay is the same size it has always been, but the vessels have grown. And with that growth comes risk. Not just the risk of collision, but the risk of proximity, of overlap, of two worldviews occupying the same space and discovering that space is finite. Ricardo Salinas Pliego was not on the bridge when Venus made contact. He was not in a position of authority. He was not part of the crew. He was, technically, just a passenger. But he was also the owner. And owners on vessels of this scale are never just passengers. He had been on the aft deck when the squall hit, not because he anticipated the collision, but because he had been there all afternoon. The aft deck of Lady Mora is one of the yacht's signature spaces. It is 100 square meters of teak, shaded by an overhang, furnished with low seating and tables designed to accommodate 12 guests comfortably. Beyond it, the swim platform, hydraulically operated, can lower to just above the waterline, creating a beach club effect. Gold railings, white cushions, a bar built into the bulkhead. Salinas had been sitting there with 2 guests, both business associates, both Mexican, both silent once the wind picked up. They had felt the yacht shift, the subtle heel to starboard as the squall hit. They had watched the crew move across the decks, securing loose items, checking lines. And then they had seen Venus. From that distance, perhaps 150 meters at the time, Venus did not look like a yacht. She looked like a wall, a floating monolith of white aluminum, angled and reflective. Her bow was sharp, not rounded, and it sat low in the water, giving the impression of something industrial, something utilitarian, a machine, not a pleasure vessel. Salinas stood. He walked to the railing, and he reached into his pocket for his phone. He was not filming for evidence, not initially. He was filming because the moment was absurd, because 2 of the most expensive private yachts in the world were about to collide and no one was doing anything to stop it. Because the bridge of Venus was empty, or appeared empty, and the wind was pushing her closer with every second. And because, on some level, he understood that this was content, he raised the phone, framed the shot, and pressed record. The video is 47 seconds long. It begins with Venus already in motion, her bow angled toward the camera. The water between the two yachts is dark, rippled by wind, the surface tension broken. The camera is steady. Salinas does not zoom. He does not pan away. He holds the frame. At the 18-second mark, Venus's bow makes contact. The sound is immediate, a low crunch, resonant, the kind of noise that carries farther than you expect. Aluminum against steel. Not a collision exactly, more of a compression. The two surfaces meeting, resisting, then yielding. Salinas does not flinch. He keeps filming. But his voice rises, first in Spanish. Oye, despierta, me chocaste. Then, realizing the crew of Venus might not understand, he switches to English. Hey, wake up! You hit me! The camera holds on Venus's bridge. The windows are dark. No movement. No acknowledgement. At the 30-second mark, the two yachts begin to separate. Venus's stern swings away, the wind pulling her off. The contact is broken. The scraping noise stops. And Salinas lowers the phone slightly, angling it down to show the damage. The scratch is visible even from this distance. A long, dark gouge across the white and blue hull of Lady Mora, just above the waterline. He curses quietly. Then he raises the camera again, panning back to Venus. Her bow is clear now, moving away. Still no one visible on deck. No crew rushing to assess damage. No captain appearing on the bridge wing. Nothing. The video ends. Salinas stood at the railing for another moment, watching Venus drift back into her original position as the wind began to drop. Then he turned and walked inside. He did not go to the bridge. He went to his stateroom. The owner's suite on Lady Mora occupies the entire upper deck aft. It is a space designed not for efficiency, but for presence. The bedroom alone is 60 square meters. King-sized bed, centered, facing aft through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlook the swim platform. The walls are silk, pale gold, textured. The furniture is custom, dark wood, probably mahogany, though the exact species is not public knowledge. There is a study, a sitting room, a private balcony, and a bathroom larger than most yacht cabins. Salinas sat at the desk in the study. He opened his laptop, and he uploaded the video. The caption was written quickly, but not carelessly. So the @Apple yacht Venus damaged my yacht Lady Mora in Naples today. Maybe @Lorene Powell can help me with the repairs. Or just tell people to buy more iPhones. The tone was light, almost joking, but the subtext was clear. This was not a request for help. It was a public shaming, a way of asserting dominance not through wealth, but through visibility. Salinas had been hit, yes, but he had the footage, he had the platform, and he had the willingness to use both. He posted the video at 6:47 p.m. Then he closed the laptop and went back on deck. Within minutes, the engagement began. Likes, retweets, comments. The algorithm recognized the content immediately. Conflict, wealth, absurdity. All the elements that drive virality. By 7 p.m., the video had 10,000 views. By 8, 50,000. By midnight, over 1 million. The comments were predictable. Apple can't even keep their yachts from crashing now. Siri, navigate away from the other yacht. This is what happens when you don't update iOS. The jokes were easy, the mockery reflexive. But beneath the humor was something more genuine. Fascination. The sheer spectacle of watching two billionaires' yachts collide, filmed in real time, shared publicly. Because that was the unusual part. Not the collision. Collisions happen. Yachts drag anchor. Weather shifts. Mistakes are made. What was unusual was the decision to film it. to share it, to turn a private incident into a public performance. In the world of superyachts, discretion is currency. Owners do not broadcast their locations. Crew do not speak to the press. Incidents are handled quietly, through insurers and lawyers, behind non-disclosure agreements and confidentiality clauses. The entire ecosystem operates on the principle of privacy. That is part of the appeal, the ability to move through the world unseen, or at least unrecorded. But Salinas had broken that code, and in doing so, he had weaponized the incident. The damage to his yacht was cosmetic. The damage to Venus's reputation was not, because the video did not just show a collision. It showed absence, the empty bridge, the lack of response, the silence. And in a culture that values control, that values precision, that values the appearance of competence, absence is damning. The video spread beyond social media. By the next morning, it had been picked up by maritime news outlets, by yacht blogs, by tech journalists who saw the Apple connection and could not resist. Steve Jobs' yacht collides with Mexican billionaire's vessel in Italy. Venus crashes into Lady Mora. Owner posts video. The most expensive fender bender ever. The framing was consistent. This was not a serious incident. No one was hurt. The damage was minor. But it was embarrassing. And embarrassment in this world is a liability. The response from Venus's management was silence. For 2 days, nothing. No statement, no acknowledgement. The yacht remained anchored in the Bay of Naples for another 36 hours, then departed for an undisclosed location. By the time the statement was finally released, the narrative had already solidified. The crew of MY Venus was aware of the weather conditions and took appropriate action to mitigate risk. The incident was minor, and both vessels sustained only cosmetic damage. The matter is being handled by insurers. It was a perfectly calibrated non-response. It confirmed that the incident had occurred without admitting fault. It acknowledged the damage without quantifying it. It mentioned insurers, implying that the matter was being resolved through proper channels. But it gave no details, no explanation of why the bridge appeared empty, no acknowledgement of the radio calls, no apology. And that absence of apology was perhaps the most telling detail of all. Because in the language of maritime incidents, silence is not neutrality. It is strategy. An apology can be used as evidence of liability. An explanation can be used to assign fault. So the default position, particularly for vessels of this value, is to say nothing. Let the insurers handle it. Let the lawyers negotiate. Do not admit, do not explain, do not engage. But that strategy assumes the incident remains private. It assumes the only parties involved are the two vessels, their crews, their insurers. It does not account for social media, for a video with 1 million views, for a narrative that has already escaped the controlled channels of maritime law and entered the public domain. The damage to Venus was assessed 3 days later when the yacht arrived at a repair facility in Sardinia. The bow plating had a small dent, approximately 30 centimeters in diameter, and some scuffing to the aluminum finish. The repair estimate was €60,000. Buffing, re-anodizing, blending. The work would take a week. The damage to Lady Mora was more visible, but structurally identical. A gouge, 3 meters long, that had removed paint and exposed bare steel. No penetration. No compromise to the hull integrity. The repair estimate was higher, €180,000, mostly because of the gold lettering. That had to be removed. The surface repaired and repainted, and the lettering reapplied. Gold leaf over marine-grade enamel. Each letter costs approximately €4,000 to replace. Total repair cost for both vessels, €240,000. For context, Lady Mora's annual operating cost is estimated at €15 million. That includes crew salaries, fuel, insurance, maintenance, dockage, provisions. The collision repair represented 1.6% of a single year's operating budget. Negligible. A rounding error. But the cost was never the point. The point was the spectacle. The fact that it had happened. The fact that it had been filmed. The fact that, for 47 seconds, two symbols of private wealth had collided in public view, and one of the owners had decided to turn that collision into content. And the content worked. The video was watched over 5 million times in the first week. It was referenced in articles, in podcasts, in comment sections across the internet. It became a meme, a punchline, a piece of evidence that even the ultra-wealthy are subject to physics, to weather, to the basic logistical constraints of operating a large object in a confined space. But it also became something else, a case study in the changing nature of privacy at sea, because the Mediterranean is crowded. The Bay of Naples, Monaco, Ibiza, Mykonos, Capri, these are not remote anchorages. They are public spaces, visible from shore, photographed by tourists, monitored by maritime authorities, and increasingly filmed by drones, by phones, by anyone with a camera and an internet connection. The assumption of privacy that once governed superyacht culture is eroding, not because the yachts are less expensive or because the owners are less discreet, but because the technology of observation has become universal. Everyone has a camera, everyone has a platform, and everyone, it seems, is willing to share. Salinas understood this. He had built his fortune in media. He understood the value of visibility, of narrative control, of being the first to frame the story. And by posting the video himself, he had ensured that the story would be told from his perspective. Venus as the aggressor, Lady Mora as the victim, the Jobs yacht, unmanned and silent, drifting into the side of a vessel whose owner was alert, engaged, filming. It was a narrative that flattered Salinas, and it worked, but it also revealed something deeper, a shift in the culture of wealth, because in the past, an owner like Salinas would have handled the incident privately. He would have called his captain, who would have called Venus's captain, and they would have exchanged information. Insurers would have been notified, surveyors dispatched, repairs scheduled, and the incident would have disappeared into the vast, undocumented archive of maritime near misses and minor collisions that happen every season. But Salinas chose visibility. He chose spectacle, and in doing so, he turned a logistical incident into a cultural moment. A moment that said, even here, in this world of controlled access and private waters, nothing is truly private anymore. The squall had passed. The wind had dropped. The bay was calm again, and the two yachts sat at anchor, separated now by 300 meters, their swing circles no longer overlapping. Crew moved across the decks, securing gear, checking systems, preparing for departure. On Venus, the bridge was occupied now. The captain had appeared. The officer on watch had filed his report. The insurers had been called. The machinery of incident response had begun. On Lady Mora, the crew inspected the damage. Photographs were taken, measurements recorded. A surveyor would arrive the next morning, flown in from Rome, to assess the hull and provide an official estimate. But the real assessment had already been made, not by surveyors or insurers, but by the internet, by the million people who had watched the video, who had read the caption, who had decided in that moment who was at fault and who was the victim. And that assessment, unlike the physical damage, could not be repaired. The video went live at 6:47 p.m. By 7:30, it had been shared 2,000 times. By 9, it had appeared on 3 maritime news blogs, 2 yacht forums, and a Reddit thread titled Billionaire Problems. By midnight, it had been covered by Bloomberg, by the Daily Mail, by Italian news outlets, and by tech journalists who recognized the Apple connection and understood that anything involving Steve Jobs, even posthumously, was worth covering. The engagement metrics were extraordinary. 5 million views in the first week, 15,000 comments, 40,000 shares. And the tone of those comments was consistent. Mockery, disbelief, a kind of schadenfreude that only emerges when the ultra-wealthy experience inconvenience. Imagine being so rich your yacht hits another yacht. This is the most expensive parking accident in history. Apple's new autopilot feature needs work. The jokes were predictable, but they were also revealing, because underneath the humor was a fascination with the logistics. How does a yacht collision even happen? Who is liable? How much does it cost to repair a scratch on a vessel worth 100 million euros? And why, in an age of GPS and radar and advanced navigation systems, did two of the most sophisticated private yachts on Earth end up in the same space at the same time? Those were legitimate questions, and the video did not answer them. It only showed the moment of contact, the approach, the impact, the absence of response. Everything else was speculation. But speculation is fuel, and Salinas had provided plenty of it. His caption was not neutral. Maybe @Lorene Powell can help me with the repairs, or just tell people to buy more iPhones. It was a taunt, a public call-out, and it worked exactly as intended. It framed the incident not as an accident, but as a failure of the Venus crew to maintain watch, a failure to respond to radio calls, a failure, by extension, of the entire aesthetic that Venus represented. Minimalism, efficiency, control. Because if the yacht that Steve Jobs commissioned, the yacht designed to be the ultimate expression of clarity and precision, could drift into another vessel in broad daylight, what did that say about the philosophy behind it? That question, more than any logistical detail, drove the virality. Because the collision was not just about two yachts. It was about two visions of wealth. Venus represented the future, the clean, the efficient, the invisible. Lady Mora represented the past, the ornate, the visible, the unapologetic. And in that moment, in the Bay of Naples, the past had won. Because the past had been filming. Salinas understood the power of that framing. He had built Grupo Salinas into a conglomerate by understanding media, by understanding narrative, by understanding that in the modern economy, perception is as valuable as capital. He owned television networks, retail chains, telecommunications companies. He knew how to control a story. And this story, this collision, was an opportunity. Not an opportunity to extract payment. The repair costs were negligible. Not an opportunity to sue. Maritime liability is complex, expensive, and slow. But an opportunity to assert dominance. To remind the world that he existed. That his yacht, his presence, his willingness to engage publicly made him more relevant than the silent, minimalist ghost ship of a dead tech visionary. The video was not evidence. It was performance. And the performance worked. Within days, Salinas had gained 50,000 new followers on X. His engagement rate tripled. News outlets requested interviews, which he declined, letting the video speak for itself. Yacht forums debated the incident for weeks. Who was at fault? Was Venus dragging anchor? Was Lady Mora anchored too close? Did the crew fail to maintain proper watch? The technical debates were endless, but they missed the point because the technical details did not matter. What mattered was the image. Venus, silent and drifting. Lady Mora, occupied and filming. The contrast was visual, immediate, and damning. And that contrast played into a larger narrative about wealth and technology. Because Venus was not just a yacht, she was a symbol of Silicon Valley, of the new economy, of the idea that wealth could be invisible, frictionless, efficient, that the future of luxury was not gold leaf and grand staircases, but clean lines and integrated systems. But the collision had revealed a flaw in that vision, because no matter how clean the lines, no matter how integrated the systems, a yacht is still a physical object. subject to wind, subject to current, subject to the basic physics of mass and momentum. And when two physical objects occupy overlapping space, aesthetics do not matter, only geometry. The insurers handled the claim with the efficiency that only comes from experience. Maritime incidents between private yachts are rare but not unheard of. The process is well established. Surveyors are dispatched. Damage is assessed. Liability is determined based on a combination of factors: which vessel was anchored first, whether proper watch was maintained, whether radio protocols were followed, whether the anchor was set correctly, whether the weather conditions were foreseeable. In this case, liability was straightforward. Venus had swung into Lady Mora's position. Lady Mora was stationary, properly anchored, with engines on standby. Venus, while also anchored, had failed to respond to radio calls and had made contact. Under maritime law, the moving vessel is generally at fault, even if that movement is caused by wind or current rather than propulsion. Venus's insurers accepted liability within 3 weeks. The claim was settled for €240,000, covering repairs to both vessels. No dispute, no arbitration, just a wire transfer and a signed release. But the settlement was confidential. The public never saw the amount. They never saw the liability determination. They only saw the video. And the video told a different story, a story of negligence, of absence, of a yacht designed to be smarter than its crew, failing in the most basic way possible. That story persisted long after the repairs were completed, long after Venus left the Mediterranean, long after Lady Mora moved on to her next anchorage, because the video was permanent, archived, searchable, and every time someone searched for Venus or for Superyacht collision or for Steve Jobs' yacht, they found it. That permanence is the new reality of wealth at sea. Incidents that once disappeared into insurance files now live forever online. Mistakes that once would have been forgotten are now memorialized, commented on, mocked. Privacy, the currency that once defined ultra-high net worth culture, has been replaced by visibility. And visibility is a liability. Because the Mediterranean is not getting less crowded. It is getting more crowded. Every year, more superyachts are launched. The fleet of vessels over 50 meters grows by approximately 30 per year. And while the number of anchorages remains fixed, the demand for those anchorages increases. The Bay of Naples can hold comfortably perhaps 20 yachts over 50 meters. But during peak season, that number regularly exceeds 30. Monaco, during the yacht show, hosts over 100. Ibiza, in July and August, becomes a floating parking lot. And as the yachts grow larger, the margins shrink. A yacht that is 80 meters long needs more space than a yacht that is 50 meters long, not just for its physical dimensions, but for its swing radius, for its tender operations, for the exclusion zone that its crew instinctively maintains. And when 30 yachts, each over 70 meters, attempt to anchor in a bay designed for 20, the geometry fails. The Venus and Lady Mora collision was not an anomaly. It was a preview, a demonstration of what happens when the density of wealth exceeds the capacity of the space meant to contain it. And it will happen again, not because crews are incompetent, not because owners are careless, but because the physics of the situation are unsustainable. The yachts are too large. The anchorages are too small. The margins are too thin. And the incentive to anchor in the most prestigious locations, regardless of capacity, remains unchanged. Because prestige is the point. A yacht anchored off Capri is more valuable socially than a yacht anchored off a remote island in the Aegean. Not because Capri is more beautiful, but because Capri is visible. Because other yachts are there. Because the anchorage itself is a form of status, a way of signaling that you belong to the ecosystem of people who summer in the Mediterranean, who move through the same circuit, who occupy the same spaces. The collision between Venus and Lady Mora was a collision of philosophies, yes, but it was also a collision of geography, of too many objects in too small a space. And as long as the number of yachts continues to grow and the number of prestigious anchorages remains fixed, that collision will repeat. The Bay of Naples is calm now. The squall has passed. The yachts have moved on. Venus returned to the Americas, where she spends most of her time cruising quietly along the Pacific coast, rarely photographed, rarely mentioned. Lady Mora continued her Mediterranean summer, moving from Naples to Capri to Sardinia to Monaco, her gold lettering freshly repainted, her owner still active on social media, still posting, still engaging. The scratch is gone. The dent is gone. The physical evidence of the collision has been erased, but the video remains. 47 seconds, 5 million views. A permanent record of the moment when two visions of wealth touched, briefly, violently, and then separated. And in those 47 seconds, something shifted. Not in maritime law, not in insurance protocols, not in the technical procedures that govern how yachts are anchored and operated, but in the culture of wealth itself. Because Salinas had proven something, that privacy is optional, that incidents can be weaponized, that the old rules, the unspoken agreements that governed how the ultra-wealthy interacted with one another, no longer apply. That in the age of social media, every collision is content. Every mistake is a meme. Every embarrassment is public. And that shift, more than the collision itself, is what makes this incident significant. Not because of the damage, not because of the cost, but because of what it revealed about the future. The future is not private. The future is not discreet. The future is filmed, shared, commented on, archived. And no amount of minimalist design, no amount of control, no amount of wealth can prevent that. Venus was designed to be invisible, to move through the world without being seen, to represent a philosophy of luxury that was about reduction, about clarity, about the elimination of excess. But invisibility requires consent. It requires that everyone involved agrees not to look, not to film, not to share. And that consent is breaking down. Not because people are more intrusive, but because the tools of observation are universal. Everyone has a camera. Everyone has a platform. And the incentive to use those tools, to capture moments of absurdity or conflict or spectacle, is stronger than any social contract about discretion. Salinas understood that. He understood that the collision was not just a maritime incident. It was an opportunity to assert his presence, his relevance, his willingness to engage in a way that the Jobs estate never would. Because the Jobs estate operates on the old rules: silence, privacy, the assumption that wealth buys not just objects, but the ability to control how those objects are perceived. But that assumption is obsolete. The collision between Venus and Lady Mora was not the most expensive maritime incident of the year. It was not the most dangerous. It was not even the most dramatic, but it was the most visible. And visibility in the current economy of attention is what matters. Because the story is no longer about the yachts. It is about the narrative, about who gets to tell it, about who has the platform, the audience, the willingness to share. And in that contest, minimalism loses. Silence loses. The aesthetic of control, of reduction, of invisibility loses to the aesthetic of presence, of volume, of engagement. Lady Mora is loud. She is visible. She is gold-lettered and multi-tiered and impossible to ignore. And when she collided with Venus, the yacht designed to be the opposite of all those things, the contrast was too perfect to ignore. So it was filmed, and shared, and watched, and commented on, and turned into a case study, a meme, a moment that will outlive the yachts themselves. Because yachts can be repaired. Scratches can be buffed. Dents can be filled. But the internet is forever.